Hello, everyone. It is Monday, December 1st, the first day of December, which is a great month. Actually, it's an expensive month for me because I have two children with birthdays, one tomorrow and one on the 13th. And then, of course, the birth of our Savior and Lord. And so it's just an expensive month, but one of my favorites. So here I am doing my live because YouTube banned me or demonetized me. So now I want to do lives because I'm crazy. But anyway, so I think I'm going to treat these as like intelligence briefings about different topics, economy, spirituality, whatever we deem interesting for the day or current or relevant, I guess. But yeah, so I guess it kind of goes with the theme of where I'm trying to go with my business. And so I'm really trying to, I'll always have the investigations, if you will, as a groundwork, as a foundation, but I'm trying to move into more of the private intelligence sector, which is different than investigations. So, quick overview: investigations is more of an adverse event already happened, and we need somebody to figure out the details of that. Intelligence is more of predicting outcomes, doing risk assessment, threat assessment, pattern analysis, things that I'm naturally good at and probably have been doing on this channel for 5 years now since it started. I'm just very much a big picture person, so I like that whole intelligence gathering, although it does overlap with some investigative skills such as surveillance is a big one. So the way I explained it to my son yesterday, who was weirdly asking me about it, was, for example, a dentist office calls me next door. So we have a dentist office next door. The dentist office next door calls me and they say, hey, somebody is stealing from us. We think it's an employee. We need you to figure out who. That would be an investigation, traditional investigation, right? But if the dentist office calls me and says, hey, I just hired a bunch of people, or I need to hire a new crew or whatever, and I want to secure my assets and see how likely I am to be stolen from in the future, that's intelligence. So that's where it would be due diligence on these new hires and looking at the internal systems to see if the financial systems are susceptible to fraud, things like that. So intelligence versus investigations, there's some overlap, but it is a little bit different. So what we're doing today is talking about, for me, this is intelligence. I'm putting out an intelligence report in the beef industry, but the beef industry is crossing over into being investigated due to some accusations of fraud by Donald Trump and his Department of Justice, DOJ. So I actually wrote a blog article on this. So I'm just going to pull that up from my website, immaculate-international.com. And I think I linked this in the description or somewhere. Maybe I'll just put that in the chat too. But if you go to that website, go to blog, it's the first one. I think it's like news and blog is the first article. So it's called DOJ launches antitrust investigation into America's beef industry, what it means for consumers, producers, and corporate counsel. So a lot of people don't know how big and controversial and somewhat monopolized the beef industry is here in America. And so why I'm kind of bringing this up is because I touched on it. What did I touch on the other day? The last thing I did, or actually maybe the first live I did a couple of days ago, I think I was talking about the tariffs. There's a lot of fraud. There's a lot of fraudulent things. I was talking about Donald Trump's economic plans, I guess is what I was doing. So I had kind of mentioned the beef industry, but didn't go into detail. So this is kind of a follow-up to that. But the beef industry is the backbone of American protein supply. It's a $100 billion plus market that sits at the intersection of food security, national economics, and global trade. And now it is officially under the microscope. So following months of heightened prices, like I can tell you guys, even here, I bought steaks. It was like a couple weeks ago. I wanted to buy some steaks to make something, and it was crazy. It was like $22 for like the worst steaks ever, and there was like 2 small ones in the package, and that was at like the cheapest store that we have here, Food Line. So it's definitely outrageous. So following months of heightened prices and pressure on ranchers, the U.S. Department of Justice has opened a sweeping antitrust investigation into the nation's largest meatpacking companies. The allegations: price fixing, collusion, coordinated supply restrictions, and abuse of market power in a sector dominated by 4 massive processors. So let's just break that down in layman's terms. They're not going after the ranchers, they're going after the meat processing plants. Why? Because there's 4 of them. So ranchers haven't made a profit, haven't seen their profits increase from this drastic increase on the consumer of beef prices, right? So the meat processing, who acts as kind of the middleman, is owned and controlled 80 to 85% of beef processing, of that market, is owned by only 4 companies. So what the DOJ is saying is, okay, if the ranchers aren't getting the profit, but the consumers' prices have increased, what is going on? Who is making the profit? And so now they're investigating the meat processors. And a lot of this has to do with the tariffs, okay? And this is what I was getting at. There are unintended consequences of trying to level the playing field. So when you have something like the beef industry that's controlled by 4 companies, 80 to 85% is controlled by 4 companies, they already don't have competition. They already don't have a lot of domestic competition. Historically, their competition is coming from outside the United States. I think like South America, like Brazil, I think is a big one. And so with the tariffs going on foreign meat, foreign beef, they really have no competition. And so they're able to set their prices anywhere they want, okay? Because what they're doing is they're saying, well, people now have to pay double for Brazilian beef because of these tariffs. I'm exaggerating. It's not double. I don't know what the number is. I think it was, actually, I wouldn't even guess, but not double, but let's say 30%. So people now are paying 30% more for Brazilian beef products. So what we're going to do is we're going to get together, the collusion, we're going to get together in a group, and we're going to say, okay, we're going to take actions in certain ways, various ways, to be able to raise our prices, inflate our prices, because there's no one from the outside that can bring them down currently. There's no competition. And so that is one of the unintended consequences of tariffs, which is what I was trying to say in one of my last videos. So the hidden architecture of the beef market. For decades, the U.S. beef industry has operated in extreme consolidation. Like I said, 80 to 85% is owned by 4 companies. These same companies heavily influence pricing, supply, bidding, and contract structures. Ranchers often face a take it or leave it market with little room to negotiate. And so here's the thing, right? So these processors are being supplied by these ranchers. And so the ranchers have more to lose, because if they can't sell off their product, they're in a much more vulnerable position than these huge companies, right? So when an industry becomes this concentrated, the line between competitive strategy and anti-competitive conduct becomes dangerously thin. Consumers see soaring grocery prices, producers see shrinking margins, attorneys see potential liability, investigators see patterns, and DOJ sees probable cause. So what triggered the investigation? Over the past year, beef prices have surged at double-digit levels, while rancher profits stagnated, an economic imbalance that sets off alarms inside the DOJ and USDA. Whistleblowers, producer groups, and state officials raised concerns that the big 4 processors may have coordinated purchasing to drive cattle prices down. So basically, they're getting together and bullying ranchers. That's what that means. Coordinated purchasing is they are underbidding each other. They're doing a bunch of shady stuff. Restricted slaughter capacity to squeeze supply. So I don't know how they did that. Maybe I think they shut down plants. And so we saw this kind of as a natural consequence of COVID. I think it was the chickens or beef or pork, something like that. A bunch of, like Smithfield, I think it was, or Purdue, had to shut down plants. And what happened was the prices went up because there was a restricted capacity to actually process the animals. So restricted slaughter capacity, they're saying they're doing it on purpose. Maybe they're shutting down plants on purpose or firing people on purpose, whatever the situation is. Aligned wholesale pricing to maintain high margins. So selling it cheap to maintain high margins. Engaged in, and so selling, instead of putting it into grocery stores, they're selling it to wholesalers, in other words. Engaged in price signaling or non-competitive bidding, leverage their scale to push out smaller competitors, use the lack of foreign competition due to tariffs to fix prices. So in other words, behaviors that look a lot like collusion. Some companies have already faced multi-million-dollar civil settlements in related price-fixing cases. The DOJ's involvement elevates the scrutiny from civil dispute to federal antitrust enforcement. So instead of just being on the civil side, now they're going to go after them criminally. So what they're going to focus on, the DOJ and their investigation, is the evidence of horizontal collusion, meaning did major processors share information or coordinate decisions related to supply, pricing, or capacity? Monopoly over ranchers. Did dominant buyers suppress cattle prices below competitive levels? Vertical market control. Did processors use their control over slaughter, processing, and distribution to disadvantage smaller competitors? So if you look at the history of Rockefeller, Standard Oil, he was a master at vertical market control, an absolute master. So go read about him and you'll know what that means. Consumer harm. Did families pay more at the grocery store because of the artificial price inflation? And 5, past settlements and patterns. Are previous price fixing allegations part of a broader systemic practice for companies in this sector? So this means they have to look at everything: emails, contracts, herd inventories, procurement data, internal messaging, everything for years. And all of that will now be potential evidence. So why this matters to attorneys and corporations, who this article is kind of geared toward, because that's a lot of my network and my referral base. Why antitrust investigations create multiple layers of exposure. So civil liability, class action litigation, criminal charges, reputational damage, contractual disputes with suppliers and buyers, and whistleblower actions. Under the False Claims Act or Packers and Stockyards Act, whether you represent a rancher, a distributor, a processor, or a retailer, understanding the scope of the investigation is essential. Because here's what's going to happen. This isn't a farming story. This is a corporate compliance story. But unfortunately, it's impacting people's ability to have their basic needs met, which is why I suspect the DOJ is getting involved. And quite frankly, I think Donald Trump is a little bit upset about it, because it's looking a lot like his tariff plan is having some bad consequences, which is bad for his political standing, and was very predictable. The beef industry is getting a lot of heat right now because, again, basic need, probably the most obvious. Everybody can go to the store and see the price of beef, but this is going on across multiple sectors. I promise you that. So producers, smaller companies, what they should be doing now, they should be auditing all their stuff. So audit pricing, procurement patterns, review supply agreements for vulnerability, preserve all relevant documents, prepare for subpoenas or civil investigative demands if they're in any way related to these, do business in any way, upstream, downstream, horizontally, with these meat processing plants. So the bigger picture, though, is this food supply chain risk. So the DOJ's investigation doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's part of a broader trend: scrutiny of food system consolidation, rising consumer prices, international ownership of U.S. protein infrastructure, USDA, DOJ, cross-agency enforcement, growing geopolitical instability in food markets. So beef is simply the first domino. Poultry, dairy, fertilizer, trucking, and logistics are not far behind. So, into my point of, just for the purposes of this video, not so much this article, the DOJ's investigation doesn't happen in a vacuum is correct. So now these big four who are responsible for having, allowing consumers to have their basic needs met in the protein department are going to be under heavy investigation, litigation. There's going to be a lot of changes. This is all going to affect their companies, their business models, their relationships, and their eventual pricing. So anytime there's litigation, the company's still concerned about profit. So let's just hope in the meantime, this could potentially make the problem worse short term, better long term. We'll see what happens. But when that's a big accusation. So the beef industry is so important in America, and to put the entire industry basically under investigation and antitrust investigation of this magnitude is going to rattle things in the supply chain and in the food. I mean, there's just no way around it. So what do I think is going to happen? I think it's going to be worse in the short term. That's what I think. I think we're going to see beef prices either stay where they're at or continue to go up until some sort of resolution is or negotiation or whatever, either outside court, inside court, is met, because this is kind of what happens, right? And so, you've seen people for years talk about, I have landscapers outside my office window. Sorry, they're distracting me. We've seen for years people talk about, like, why are all like Bill Gateses of the world buying up the farmlands and all this stuff? And listen, guys, like at the end of the day, there's nothing new in the world. Like wars are still fought over resources. Like that's just the facts of it. Like we could have all the technology in the world. We could have, whatever, all these advancements allegedly. But at the end of the day, everything is still fought over resources. So when you see things like 4 companies controlling 80 to 85% of beef processing, why has that gone on so long? Why has that been allowed to go on so long? And the answer is obviously lobbyists in Washington. But it shouldn't be allowed to go on. I mean, not something as significant as food, okay? And so this is why you have monopoly laws in America, because of the times of Standard Oil basically choking everybody out and, creating monopolies. Now, is there a true monopoly in America? No, there isn't, because we were relying on imports. But when we put the tariffs into place, those imports go bye-bye and everything goes up, which is exactly what I said was going to happen. Because here's the situation. You don't put tariffs on Brazilian beef when 80 to 85% of the beef processing is owned by 4 companies. What did you think was going to happen? Which is why I don't really understand people who claim that Trump plays 4D, 5D, 6D chess, because to me, it looks like he's playing checkers. I don't know. He seems very short-sighted to me. Like I said, I don't necessarily disagree with tariffs. I don't agree with blanket tariffs. And I don't agree with the way they were done as far as the timing is concerned, because when you don't have the infrastructure, like this 80 to 85% of things should have been broken up prior to implementing tariffs on Brazil. So when you don't have the internal infrastructure, this is what happens. People can't afford to buy hamburger meat, okay? Because American companies, either there is a supply problem, a supply and demand problem, which I'm assuming is what the beef is arguing. And I believe that is what they're arguing. They're saying there's something, the herds are low because of drought or something, whatever. Is that true? I don't know. That's why there's going to be an investigation. But you either create that with the tariffs, because now you're just relying on internal supply of things, or the companies, in an attempt to make more money and see this as an opportunity, create an artificial supply issue, or just raise their prices because they can, because there's no checks and balances. And so that's why I don't, America first and in the golden age of all this stuff sounds great. It sounds great in the political realm. It creates a sense of patriotism and bordering right now on nationalism, which isn't good. But at the end of the day, you have to look at the big picture. Like, is this actually good for us? Like, sentiment is cool, but people staying alive is cooler. Okay. So
Is it actually good for us to only deal with our domestic beef suppliers? No, clearly not, because I just paid $22 for the worst steaks I've ever seen. So yeah, that's why I'm shedding light on this. This is just one example though. So you have this, you're going to have this, especially with like products that are historically cheaply made in China or whatever. And like I was trying to explain in that first video, what he did is he put these American businesses in a choke point, assuming that they were going to acquiesce to him and open up their companies, their manufacturing sites here. And that's really not the trend. The trend is that they're moving from China or from the Philippines or from these more far away areas in Asia, Singapore, stuff like that. And they're moving to South America, which I assume, and I don't like to make assumptions, but I think they're probably moving to places like Venezuela in an attempt to nearshore, which means they're going to produce there, which is cheaper than it would be to produce here. And they're going to save on the logistical expenses, the shipping costs, right? And so now what are we doing? We're setting up in the Caribbean is what we're doing, battleships and bombing ships coming in from Venezuela. Now, does that have to do with the cartel? I don't know. I mean, I won't give my opinions on that. I'm sorry. I don't even want to go there right now. But historically, the CIA ships in the drugs, so whatever. Okay, let's pretend like we're fighting the cartel. I guess it makes people feel good. So, is that just setting a precedent to be able to restrict movement, and not even setting a precedent? Is it restricting movement? Is it sending a message to countries like Venezuela and these companies that are trying to do business with them, like your movement? You were trying to cut costs in the logistics shipping department, but now that's going to be disrupted because we're waging war in your path of travel. Okay. So this is how business works. And this is how politics works. And this is how the world works. And then you have people wearing MAGA hats running around saying, make America great again. We should only be doing business with ourselves. And I just want to leave the country because I can't understand why. And I'm not trying to be mean. This is why I'm sitting here taking the time at 12 noon on December 1st to try to explain and enlighten people on how things work. So I don't like paying enormous prices for beef. Maybe you do. Maybe it's worth it to you. It's not worth it to me. And I don't like putting American businesses in chokeholds. And so that's my other, I really don't. And I really wish somebody, I don't know what the SBA is doing, the Small Business Administration. I haven't even, sometimes they're pretty good. Depends who's running it. Sometimes they're pretty useless. But somebody needs to defend these businesses. And I'm not talking about the monopolies. I'm talking about the legitimate businesses, the smaller businesses that are the backbone of our economy. And somebody needs to defend them and be like, hey, these manufacturers are being left with no choice. So they either nearshore to Venezuela and have their supply chain disrupted because of the cartel. They continue doing business on China, continue importing things from manufacturers in China, whatever, and pay those tariffs. American importers pay that, American businesses do. Or they set up shop in America, take the tax breaks for, I don't know how long that goes on as far as building their manufacturing facilities here, but ultimately being pushed to open up robotic factories. And if you guys think I'm exaggerating on this, I am not. Go on a little Google or ChatGPT and look up dark manufacturing, dark factories in China. And what they are these huge factories, huge manufacturing compounds, empires, if you will, that are fully robotic, that operate in the dark. They don't even need electricity. They don't need climate control. They don't need smoke breaks. And these robots 24/7, all they're doing is pumping out. Now, is that efficient? Yes, it is. Is that cheaper? Is that a cheaper way of doing business? Yes, it is. Is that moral? Is that ethical? No, it is not. Because here's the problem. And I'm going to bring this full circle to Our Lady of Fatima, I guess, for the Catholics listening. But the problem is that is a very communistic way of looking at the economy. And the problem with that, other than the atheistic side of it, which is the theology driving it, is that you are now saying that humans are made for business and business is not made for humans. And so the whole point of business and the whole point of the economy is so that people can work, okay? So that they can provide for themselves and their families, and they could potentially own property, and they can find dignity in their work. And here's the thing with that. It's like all of these technocrats that are coming out saying, oh, in the future, don't worry, we'll just write you a check and you won't need to work and you can just sit home and blah, 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 blah. Well, the church has taught for a long time, thank you to St. Benedict, that work is actually sacred and it is a way to, in a sense, give glory to God. And so it's just very interesting times we're living in. And we'll see how it goes. We've never been here in history before, so who knows how it's going to go. I think ultimately, unless we can snap out of this communistic mindset, and even like the social Marxists, if you will, like the ones who socially say communism is bad, a lot of them do have a very communistic approach to business and the economy, and that's just the way it is. Like if you want to look at true business, true Christian sanctioned business, it came from the monks. That's where it started. That was the transition from the feudal period, in which, by the way, there were businesses in the feudal. I know a lot of people don't realize that, but merchants and things was a very big class. But that was like the transition into the free market, if you will. It was like the monks. It started with the monastic free market foundation way of doing things. And with the understanding that that was for humans, like the point of that industry was to serve humans, not the other way around. So I hope that there doesn't come a day where we are serving the robots, but that is kind of the way it seems like it's going to go. And I actually came across something this morning. I didn't click on it. I don't know if it was propaganda or not, but it was like one of the techie people coming out and saying like, oh no, don't worry, the robots aren't going to take your job. You're going to basically work for them. Like you're going to work harder because now the robot's going to be your boss and you're going to have to work alongside of it and tell you what to do. Like, first of all, I don't even take orders from humans. So I'm not going to do well at this, which is why I'm not in the workforce, right? I do my own thing because I know that about myself. And so, going back to ideal businesses. So business has, I think that was one of the first areas they captured, even before like the domestic life and in the social sphere of things. The communists definitely, I would say, captured the, I don't want to say like the theology of business, but the theory of business before anything else. And so if you look at like the spirit of business, even amongst like capitalist societies, it is very communistic. It is very new agey. It's getting very superstitious. It's very ends justify the means. All of the things you see with Donald Trump, backstabbing, all of that, manifesting is a big one. A lot of this comes from the mysticism branch of a certain religion named Israel. But it's basically it's this expression of, Kabbalism. I mean, that's really what it is. It's all about manifesting and you're your own God and law of attraction. That's where that's business is completely taken over by it. And so with that comes this understanding that the ends justify the means. The human dignity, the dignity of the worker doesn't really matter as long as there's a profit and all this kind of stuff. And so the actual Christian way that's not talked about and not written about, there's one good book I highly recommend if you are a Christian business owner or a business owner at all for that matter. It's called Business as a Calling, and it's written by a Catholic, and it describes the actual way that business can glorify God and the way it's supposed to be and the way it was intended to be. So before it got hijacked like everything else. But anyway, hi Katie, hope you're doing well. I'm having a slow day. So I don't know, 12:30. I didn't sleep well last night at all. But yeah, so if anybody has comments on the beef industry or has firsthand knowledge of like if you're a rancher or something like that, I'd love to hear your side of it. And part of me wonders if this isn't an overall plan on behalf of DJT to put the processors in a bad position, the four companies, the big four, to bankrupt them in order to bring in a different agenda where they can only afford to hire robots. I don't know. I'm just saying I wouldn't put it past anyone at this point. But I definitely don't think that the robotics part of all of this is not getting enough attention. It's not. So we'll see what happens. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm usually not. So John Carter on DDS knows all about it. Firsthand experience in the, is that Dr. Deep State? Oh, like the John Carter, the guest. Firsthand experience in the Amazon basin. Is that Brazil? Sorry, I'm kind of got it. That's Brazil though, right? Yeah, I think Brazilian ranchers. All right, so then you have, there's a lot of problems actually down there because, and even here, and I have firsthand knowledge of a lot of really terrible things going on here out west. In the, I would say not so much the farming community, but the ranch, like people who raise pigs on a mass scale, chickens, things like that. In regards to these environmental groups. And I think there's a problem with that in Brazil. So I think that there's a lot of fraud in the, well, we know there's a lot of fraud, right? So I remember, first of all, I'm of the opinion that millennials should be able to sue Al Gore, okay? Because when I was in, I don't know, 7th grade, 8th grade, something, we were probably all of them, maybe high school too. We were forced to watch this terrible video, An Inconvenient Truth, where polar bears were dying, okay? And so personally, me not knowing politics or anything back then, in my classmates, this was very upsetting to us. Like we were trying, like it was so emotional, like the poor polar bears, like and at the time, like nobody, this was like global or climate change, whatever it's called, global warming back then was like so new, like nobody really was refuting it yet. So like sanity wasn't prevailing, common sense wasn't prevailing. And so all we were like drilled with was like these polar bears dying, right? And so they like told us by the time we were going to get out of high school, like there's going to be no more polar bears or whatever. Like definitely they were going to be extinct in our lifetime. So it was horrible. And so that influences. And then like looking around, here we are, 2025, almost 2026. The polar bears are obviously still here. And I just think there should be some class action lawsuit against Al Gore for that emotional trauma. But anyway, so here's the problem with environmental groups that I've seen, okay? And this isn't just the nonprofits, it's the for-profit. And a lot of people don't know there's okay, so I don't want to get like, there's certain like land conservation groups that are actually for profit that act like they're nonprofit and take donations, but they're for profit. But a lot of the problems with them is that they basically are just an arm. First of all, there's a lot of situations. Let's talk about the fraud. There's a lot of situations where it's been shown through various ways that they are actually making the problem, either starting the problem or making the existing problem worse in order to receive donation and fundings. It's one of those like create the crisis so we can present the problem and get paid for it sort of things, but on like a donation level. So like say for example, I'm trying to think of a specific example. I don't know, but let's say like they're raising money out, like one of these environmental groups is going to raise money out west because all the trees are getting cut down or whatever. The forests are going away. And I think that was a big one too, right? Like the rainforest, we had to watch Fern Gully grow. There was just a lot of brainwashing that went on amongst my generation. So just go easy on us. So, like, for example, they're saying the forests are getting chopped down by these logging companies, whatever the situation is. So they're collecting these donations to allegedly fight them. But really what's going on behind the scenes is they are hiring them to perpetuate the problems so that they can get the donations. Okay? Long of the short, I'm not giving that as a specific example. I'm giving it as a general example of how these things work. Now, Brazil, yeah, please find that for me. That would be great, Katie. Brazil, I think, has similar issues. So, like the Amazon, from what I understand, is a very lawless place. Okay, and there's a lot of rogue groups that go in and open up like illegal gold mines and things like that. And then a lot of times you have to be concerned about like these preservation groups that are using that as a cover. This is going way off track, but let's look at national forests in America. This is just what, all right, we'll say federal lands in America, okay? The federal government gives out leasing to, leases out federal lands, especially like places like Wyoming, to oil companies. Okay, so it becomes this buddy-buddy system. There's a lot of money to be made, but worse than that, federal lands are actually not really directly able to be used for collateral to get like credit, rack up debt for the country, but it is viewed as an asset. So it factors into like our credit rating in a weird way because it's known, like, so if we have all of these oil rich, mineral rich federal lands that are not allowed to be developed on, it is thought that it is counted as an asset because the federal government can then sell that to the highest bidder and use that money to pay off the whatever debt they have or service the interest rate and stuff like that. And so you have these situations where a lot of these like not so much here, maybe a little bit, but the nonprofits and things like that go and make all these, fight these legal battles so that these governments, the really corrupt governments, can preserve this land. And then it's used as a bargaining chip, and down the road, it goes to the highest bidder. So instead of it being kept with like the local ranchers, the local landowners, things like that, it's pretty much just taken from them in a land grab and sold to the highest bidder for things like gold mines, minerals, stuff like that. So Brazil has a big problem with what I just mentioned as far as like it's basically lawless in the Amazon. From last I knew, I don't know much about it, but I do know there's a lot of private security and risk management that goes on down there because these companies are trying to mine and things like that. And there's just so many different, it's almost like cartels, just different groups that are come in and basically take things over and open up their own illegal mines and things like that. So I guess who's behind it? Oh, I could guess. I could guess. And I don't have to guess, and I don't even have to look at the proof because it's they've been doing this for a long time and they know what they're doing and they're very good at it. And so that's when people are like, they don't understand. And I just feel bad. I'm at a point where I feel bad for people who don't understand. Because it's like, oh, in theory, MAGA, and we want a businessman and all stuff, but you don't know what you're asking for. You don't know what you're asking for. And it's not going to benefit you because maybe some things will, but ultimately the agenda is not to benefit you. It's to benefit the cabal, if you will. So anyway, I'm going to sign off here and eat some lunch, and it's cold here and it's like wintry, which is kind of great. I actually am one of the weird people that lives in the South that actually hates hot weather. So I prefer the winter, so I'm not like real upset about it. But it is weird. The problem with the Southern winter is it doesn't stay cold, so you can never really get acclimated to it. So it's like where I'm from in the Northeast, it's always, it's cold from October to May, April. So you get acclimated to it. Here we get these like short bursts of like 30-degree weather and you absolutely freeze. And then it'll be like 60, 70. So it's like really back and forth, which makes it hard to adjust to anything. Summer, I do not prefer summer. I hate the heat. I don't like to sweat. I don't tan well. I really don't like to sweat. I hate sweating. I don't like the summer. So anyway, I'm probably like one of the few Southerners. But I didn't choose to move here. I kind of got put here. I'm making the best of it. But I think I have one more good move, maybe a couple left in me, and I foresee that being to a cooler climate. Don't know what that's going to look like yet, but I won't stay here forever, that's for sure. So, all right, signing off. Have a great day, and we'll be back tomorrow. So tomorrow, I think I'm going to switch gears. I kind of wanted to talk about the Vatican spy network and what that looks like. Maybe I'll do that because I've been reading some interesting things about that. I could also do some how the professionals influence people's behavior. I could do that. PsyOps. I did a repost of a PsyOps video from like a colonel who was in a PSYOP unit in the army. And it was interesting because one of the things I took from that was that while it is illegal, which I knew to technically here's what's illegal. The U.S. military, the U.S. Army, and their designated PSYOPs units are not allowed to conduct PSYOPs on the American people unless it's during a time of disaster, like a natural disaster, like a hurricane, which I did not know. So I found that interesting. Now, the way around that is private companies have no such rules, so they can do whatever they want. So that's why they hire contractors to do psychological operations on us. But the United States Army technically isn't allowed to. And I think they hold pretty true to that. But I found it interesting because he was kind of given some insider info on certain operations and what's allowed, what's not allowed, what tactics they use, things like that. So that's probably on the community board because I did a repost of that. And it was actually a class put out by, or some sort of continuing ed or advanced degree course, whatever, put out by Johns Hopkins University on intelligence specifically. But okay, I will talk to y'all later. And yeah, Katie, send me that video if you can, because I'd be interested to know about this John Parker, is that his name? And then the Brazilian ranchers, because I'm going to guess without knowing, there was corrupt environmental groups in cahoots with the government and the bankers, or like, I mean, it's kind of the same story everywhere, that stole land from the local ranchers. And so that is always what it comes down to, right? So it always comes down to abolishing private property, because we're in a war over resources. They want to control the resources, the rich people want to control all the resources, and they can't have pesky families in the way of their agenda who may not sell the land, may not let them mine on their land, whatever the situation is. And whoever owns the resources and owns the land, still, as prehistoric as this sounds, has the power. And that's just the truth. And so when you hear things like you'll own nothing and be happy, okay, yeah, well, maybe a lot of people will be. And I'll say that just from understanding people's psychology. There's a lot of people who can't handle responsibility, don't want the responsibility of owning property. And it's a lot of work. Just owning a small home is a lot of work and it's expensive. And so maybe the happiness does go up short term, but in the long run, it's disastrous, because now there's absolutely the people hold no power. And listen, and I'm not talking about like false democracies like that we live in, or any democracy, whatever, I won't even go there, where people have this illusion of power because they can vote. That's not where our power is. Our power is not in voting. It is not in participating in the political circus. I have news for you. Our power is in owning assets, owning real estate, owning businesses, owning income generating assets. That's where our power is, but especially in owning hard resources such as land. That's the primary one. So, all right, talk to y'all later. Tomorrow, I don't know, Vatican spies, not sure yet. I'll let you know what I'm going to do. In the morning, I'll post it. Talk to y'all later.